Hello, welcome to the Working with Location Services using ArcGIS API for JavaScript. My name is Bjorn Svensson. I am the lead product engineer for the JavaScript API, and my co-presenter today is Chris Utmore. He's a product engineer with the ArcGIS Online team. He focuses on the map viewer, both of them, and also hosts the data among many other things. Let's get started. So in the plenary this morning, you probably heard more about Platform with capital P. And you might also been listening into our session, not our session, but the 10 o'clock session from Ewan Cameroon and David Cardella, where they talked more about the ArcGIS Platform introduction to developers. Those are sort of the building blocks and set up the stage for this session. This session is specifically about the JavaScript API and how you can use it with the new platform. For those of you who are existing developers or working with ArcGIS Online and JavaScript API, most of these things are known items and not any surprises. So we have a set of ready-to-use services, base maps with different styles, geocoding, routing, geo-enrichment, spatial analysis, demographics, and so on. And we also have the data hosting and content management. Again, most of the things are not specific for the ArcGIS platform. These have been available on ArcGIS Online and the ArcGIS Enterprise and so on for quite a long time. So diving into how to use it with the JavaScript API. One of the new key aspects is the API key. So we had different ways to authenticate before, but what we added in January as part of the ArcGIS platform release was API keys. Now, API keys are a little different in the sense that they are permanent tokens. And so once you create one, you can use it as long as you want. There's no deadline until you basically delete it. This is different from the tokens we have with ArcGIS Identity. When you're logging in with a username and password, and we create a temporary token that's good by default for 60 minutes. There are benefits and some disadvantages of using permanent tokens, of course. They last longer and they can be, stolen easier and reused. And so it's important that you maintain awareness about that. And we'll talk more about that towards the end of this presentation. So let's dig in deep, dive in and see our first demo. So we're going to go to the ArcGIS developer dashboard, the developer dashboard. I'm logged in as a user that has a developer subscription. And you can see at the top here, there's a little banner here. And the first time you log in, you get an option for how to customize your account. So you can say that you primarily work with JavaScript API, which I do. You also have some options for what you primarily want to use the developer site for. This helps us provide the right content or appropriate content for you when you're here. And you can minimize this when you've done it. You see it also gives us a quick link to the JavaScript API since we said that's what we're interested in. The first time you come in here as a user, as the developer account user, you'll have one API key. You can click on API keys or the manage to create new ones. So it's easy, for example, to create a new API key. And you give it a very descriptive name that you remember later what it was for. Now, once you create the new key, you can't see it, so I can demo it safely for you guys. But I can copy it here, the key, so I have it in my memory, and I can use it later. The quickest way to get started is basically go to a tutorial. The tutorial goes through in details for the very first time if you haven't used API keys, what to do. Or if you're a little less patient, you can click on the solutions right away, viewing CodePen. Now, the first time you go here, you'll notice that it asks you to log in. Now, that's because we haven't provided an API key yet. So I'm going to paste in the API key that I just created. And the app refreshes, and you can see that it now shows the base map appropriately. So let's look at the code and see what's actually happening here. If you're familiar with the JavaScript API, most of this should not be very surprising. The first thing that's different, well, you might have used it before, is that you use the Esri config. We're going to use that to set our API key. Once you've set this key with the Esri config, you have a global API key in your application, and this will be used when necessary by the application. In this case, I'm using a map that have a named base map, ArcGIS typographic. This is one of the new base maps that are part of the developer subscription. If you don't have an API key, you will not be able to use this one. And that's why we got prompted to log in. That was a very quick demo of how to use the developer dashboard to get your key and create your first application. Now I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he's going to talk about data hosting and content management.
Thanks, Bjorn. Let me get my screen shared. All right, great. All right, so Bjorn's gave a quick demo on the API keys, and I want to kind of change tacks and talk about something related, and we'll lead to that. And that is data hosting and content management. Essentially, building the data, building the web map, managing content for how you're going to leverage the API key with the resources, and a lot of that is tied around the web map. And this is a broad area. It's a deep area as well. Data hosting and content management. There's a lot to cover there, but our hope here is to kind of ring some bells along the way, kind of open some eyes, maybe a refresher about all the rich content available in ArcGIS Online and part of the ArcGIS platform, whether that's with your developer subscription or with an organizational subscription. There's really quite a wealth of things you can do before you even get to the development side. And these are all things that you can do without having to have any apply any programming, any coding, or any scripting. You certainly can, but you don't have to. You can instead have all of your development focus on the apps you want to have for your audience. And with that, all right. So to start with, is getting your data in ArcGIS Online in the platform. The first thing there is that there's a variety of hosted layer types, and from hosted raster layer tile layers to hosted vector tile layers. And don't want to get into all those today, but what I want to focus on is hosted feature layers and some of the things you can do there. First, you can start with a variety of source types, whether that's shapefile, file geodatabase, GeoJSON, CSV, or a spreadsheet. Or you can start from scratch and build your own schema and add data later through whatever data collection strategy you're planning. And then that also ties into the update pattern, whether that's a pen, whether that's editing, whether that's overwrite, or some other scripting approach like notebooks to keep your data updated on the interval that's appropriate for you. And then finally, once you have your data, once you have your hosted layer and you've made some configurations and you have it ready to put into a web map or into your app, you need to consider things like base maps with API keys and any other layers that you want. And one of the key aspects of that is the new map viewer, is that it can build web maps, which are collections of various layers and resources, and stores the configurations you made with them, and it's all driven by a common spec that is honored from the map viewer, from other apps in the platform, to ultimately your JS API app. And let's cover some of these in a quick demo. They're a different screen here. All right. Okay, all right. So the first thing I want to show you is, and we're looking here at the layers dashboard on the developer site, and you can see that there's import data options, and you can see the upload types that I just mentioned. You can create a new hosted feature layer from scratch, and you see some content that I've already generated. And if I flip over to the ArcGIS Online side of things, with on ArcGIS.com with the same developer subscription, you'll see the same content. I have some other stuff here, including the API keys that we've been working on, and similar for adding content and creating content. And while that's all great. I'm not trying to contrast the difference between ArcGIS developer site and ArcGIS Online. What I did want to show you or kind of demonstrate with this is that these are all built on a common set of APIs. These are publicly available APIs. So it doesn't really matter in the sense of whether you're using the developer site, ArcGIS Online, or somewhere else. You're working with a shared backend database that's hosts your content from hosted data to web maps to other content that you may generate. All right, so like I mentioned, you can add files from your computer. I'm going to skip the process here in the interest of time and dive right into my hospitals layer. I published this hospitals layer from a CSV. It has total beds available for hospitals in Kentucky. And I want to kind of take a test drive through some of these things on calling out some features along the way. And the first thing is that from both developer site, some of these things from developer site and from online, is that you can publish additional hosted layers from your feature data that you've uploaded into ArcGIS Online. You can export data into any number of formats, including open standard formats, such as GeoJSON and KML. And you can also overwrite and append. So if you had a CSV that you're getting updated from somewhere else, you can do an overwrite. And maybe it's not frankly enough to where you have to do it automated. You can do it manual, and it's certainly possible to script this as well. But let's drill into the data tab for a moment. So the data tab gives you, as you might imagine, a view of the attribute table for the data in that layer. And once you drill into fields as part of this, you can see individual fields, and you can see the total beds available, like I was just mentioning. Let's see, once you go down here and show you some other things, you can generate coded values if you have an editing strategy where you want to collect certain types of features. And back here, you can also do things like delete a layer. You can add a field. You can do calculations, whether it's Arcade or SQL. Arcade is a client-side scripting language, and it's ideal for smaller data sets. If you're trying to run calculations on a larger data set, you want to use SQL. And both of these are really powerful for if you want to add a new feature and you want to calculate the values in a new field and calculate the values from your existing fields. This is a really quick, easy way to get values into a new field. And then various aspects throughout Map Viewer and the platform in general. You can use further Arcade to do things like generate virtual fields where things are populated on the fly and injected back into the pop-up or symbology or wherever. All right. So the next thing I want to call out here with this is the ability to create a view layer. So when you publish a hosted feature layer, that data is published into the cloud for your reserved space in a database in the cloud. So when you create a feature layer view or a view layer, what happens is that there's a separate REST endpoint created that references that same data in the cloud. That separate REST endpoint is created as a different item and has its own security, and it has additional things you can configure where you can really craft a curated view of your original layer with different security. So this primary layer, this initial layer, this hospital layer, it can remain private and totally as your your primary data that isn't really exposed anywhere. All right, so I have a view created here and drill into a couple things before we take it into the map view. So as I mentioned, this is a totally separate REST endpoint. It's secured through platform sharing model. So there's not any way for users to get the data if this is what there's no way for users to get this data unless you share it with them. All right, so one of the things I want to call out here as well with feature layer views, and this is really one of the most powerful aspects of them, is the ability to only have certain features in the layer. So you can hide individual records based on some definition expression. You can define fields, and that is actually what we're going to do here, is that some of these fields aren't really appropriate for public consumption. Owner name, I think we have phone, contact, XY source. That's just, I think, clean up. We could probably even delete from the original source. And let's see, and I think, and a couple had already hit. All right, so I just applied those to the hid those from the layer, so they're not going to be included in the view anymore. And there's a lot of attributes here, but those fields are no longer included in the layer, and they're no longer available to anyone you share this view with. All right, so I'm going to open this layer in the new map viewer. Right now, it's map viewer beta. It's coming out of beta next week as part of the overall ArcGIS Online 9.1 release. So things will be changing here slightly. All right, so now that we have our layer in the map viewer, there's really, this is really kind of like where it's like, what are you trying to do? Like, what are you trying to build? Because I mentioned earlier, the web map is a collection of layers with the associated configuration stored with them. And now in the map viewer, you can build your complete web map that supports API keys. And the first step to do that is that as part of a developer subscription, base maps that support API keys are included by default, non by default. And so we're going to pick one of these here, go with this one. And if you're creating a map that doesn't need API keys, you can still access the standard base maps that do not support API keys. All right, so I have my layer, I have my the base map I want that supports API keys. And then let's see, what's up? What else? Well, first thing is I want to go in and change the style. And I want to go into the available beds. And one of the nice things about the map viewer is that you can get information about the attribute that you're interested in, whether that's just field type, field aliases. There's a field description set here, and most importantly, statistics about the values within that attribute. So we're going to do available beds. And this is pretty good on its own. There's nothing wrong with this. You can also go in and drill in and adjust colors and all the cartographic tools that you would expect. And what I reiterate is that you can do all these things without a map, without the map view. You can do all these things without the web map. But what this does is that this offloads you as a developer from having to do all this in an app. We'll get to this in just a second, but you use the tools that are available with your subscription to really create this content that you envision, and then your app is really developed to just take this. All right. So don't need to drill too far in to turn this into a great map, but I want to call out some other features along the way is that can enable labels. So we're looking at beds, available beds in a hospital. We can you can see now that really doesn't get us where we want to go. And so you can apply a definition expression so that labels only show on the features that you filter. And going to do where there's some level of beds available, And look, right there, the mean average is 145 up that little bit. And getting closer, right on the center. And better, but still not quite there yet. So some other features available is stuff like clustering. And that really helps in this case. And maybe these are kind of extraneous to the specific details of the workflow, but again, it's like you can do all this stuff with a click here and then save your development energy for your actual app. Now I'm going to save this. Let's see. I'm going to take this web map. And now what I have here is just a little code sample similar to yours, where I have a web map ID plugged in, and I have the API key that we generated stored in the config. And then here's a map. And let's see. Oh, okay. Not be good. Let's see. All right. Oh, shoot. All right. Back to the right tab. Do this and do this like this. And let's try this again. This worked on the last 10 runs. Not sure why it's not working on this one. Let's see. And if I use maybe invalid now. All right. Oh, there's a couple things that I wanted to reiterate with the map view, and that is the wealth of content available from the living atlas. Whether that's demographic content, whether that's content that consumes credits, or whether that's content that just requires a subscription. And you can see in the living atlas, these are broken down by categories, whether it's trending, base maps, imagery, boundaries, people, infrastructure, environment, et cetera, and then also by layer type. So what I want to show here, though, is a few different things related to the badges. And you can see that these are all authoritative content. In case it's part of the living atlas. And here, as we get further, there's a lot of tile layers that are bubbled to the surface right now with this filter. Shoot. In there somewhere. Is you'll see content that requires a subscription. I'm kind of hacking it right here to kind of make sure the results are at the top, and you can see that. And the same thing with content that consumes credit. So the reason I want to show that is that you can see up front on the map here that you're using and leveraging this premium subscription-based content, and then will then flow as part of the API key support into your actual app. And finally, I mentioned with the map viewer, you can, it's a mashup of all these layers. Web map has this collection of layers. Is that you can bring in layers from other sources, whether that's open standards like GRSS and KML and CSV, or if it's something more like just ArcGIS server layers or browsing content in ArcGIS line. And for map viewer specifically, more will be added over time, and then we'll keep on evolving map viewer to better support these things from API keys to other things related to developer site and ArcGIS Online. So it's some of these are here, but it's all kind of the same story and the same APIs. And I think Bjorn, with that, we'll take it back over to you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm not seeing my screen yet, but Chris, your screen is there. That one's gone. Then I will share my screen. All right. Oops. And that was Chris's demos. I want to talk a little bit more about API keys. So in the demos we've shown so far, we've been showing the global API key. This is the Esri config API key that we released in January or as part of the 4.18 release. Now, in our release on April 22nd, we'll be releasing 3 more features or more fine-grained control of this that I will demo. And in July, there will be further fine-grained control for setting API keys on views and maps and things like that. Now, while the 4.19 hasn't been released yet, I do want to point out that we have a way for you to access and play with it already. And that's our github.com Esri feedback JS API next. And on it, we have a little caveat. This release is in development, it's unstable. And I'm not sure if it's unstable as much as not released. So you can think of this feedback place as a beta basically for the JavaScript API next version. And usually about a week after we released one version, we start the next version and information about it. The key aspect for it is that you can access the API in 2 different ways, either using the CDN with this next or using NPM also with the next. As part of the next repo here, we do talk about breaking changes, some bug fixes, and some deprecation. So this allows you for quick access to learn more about what's coming. Now, some of the aspects that you wouldn't have access to is the documentation. So except for what's in the changelog, there's no documentation available for the next version. That's a little drawback. But you're lucky because I happen to have a local installation of the next version's documentation already. You can see this on a temporary machine. And these are the 4.19 release notes. You can see that it also talks about the global API key that was added before and how in this version in 4.19, the widgets are a little smarter about using it and defaulting to it. And we've also added properties on a number of classes. What I want to show here is the Directions Widget sample using an API key for the directions, but not for the map itself. So let's look at the code for this. Now, many of you are probably using Directions widgets before, and you know that the Directions widget require, or the routing part of the Directions widget require authentication. So either people can log in, or more likely you have created a utility service or a wrapper around it in ArcGIS Online or using a resource proxy to allow your app to support directions without users logging in. Now, in this application here, I'm just setting the API key on as the global API key, and it just makes it work. And that was a very basic application. What I want to show next is an example of when you would use these fine-grained API controls. So in general, if you're using an ArcGIS developer's account that you've set up, then in many use cases, you would just set a global API key and you would be done. You might want to use multiple keys for different parts. You might want to do that so you can keep track of them differently or update them. So for example, you might have one API key for a global API key that then gets used for the base maps, and you can keep track of base map usage. And you might have another API key for your Directions widget. Now, there are other cases where you might want to mix your scenarios. So you might allow people to log in to access their own content. So using ArcGIS identity for users to log in to see, for example, a private web map or content that belongs to their organization. At the same time, you can have the directions parts or geo-enrichment or other parts of the application using an API key. That link doesn't work here, but I have already set it up in my browser. So in this application, which is basically a slightly updated version of our route task sample, I'm not going to use the directions widget. I'm using route task directly. Now, in this case, I have a web map that's private. So I get it prompts me to log in. And I do that without showing my password. Now what happens here, I have a private web map, which includes the World Traffic Service. The traffic service is one of those Living Atlas services which requires you to log in and use an authenticated account, but it doesn't actually cost any credits. So it's basically a freebie if you're an ArcGIS user customer. In this application, what I've added the functionality wise that you can click on the map to add stops to the route. So I click once and I click twice, and behind the scenes, there's a route task going on that does this. Let's look at some of the code here. If we look at the route, so an overview of the sample basically is a route task. I'm having a graphics layer to display the points and the line. I'm setting some symbol on it, and when the map is loaded, I add it, and so on. But let's scroll up a little bit here and look at the route task. In this case, I'm specifying for the route task to use route API arcgis.com. So one of the difference between many of these API services that require API keys is that the REST endpoints for them are usually have the added -API. So in this case, route -API instead of route API. What I want to do next is show you a little bit about the network traffic and show how these different tokens and authentications are being used. So we have a small screen, but I'm going to try and show everything at the same time. If you paid a lot of attention, you memorized my web map, my private web map, and that it starts on 202. So I'm going to refresh the app. It will ask us for login again. And the reason why it's asking us for login is it's trying to access this web map. But if we look at the response, it says you do not have permission. So what the API does, it prompts you to logging in. So I do that. And you see that right away, there's a second request, and this one has the full web map. If we look at the headers, or actually the query string parameter, we can see here that a token is being sent in for the second request to the web map. This is the token that was created when I logged in. And in the first case, there was no token sent in why it wasn't authenticated. So this ArcGIS, this token was created through the generate token request. And oops, I guess I have to share my password, change my password now. If we look at the generate token, we could see that we saw that it had a the username and password was being sent in and a time for 60 minutes. So that's how long my token is valid for. Let's move on to the route task part of this. You might know that the actual route task command is solve. And so when I click not once, but twice, it's going to make a request to the solve service. And you can see here it's sending in a token that starts on AAPK, which if you paid close attention, was the API key that I have on my route task. Now, as we click on the map, it makes additional requests for the server service. And you can notice here that the first time the token actually is part of the GET request, because the URL is so short, we make a GET request. But as you have more points, the request gets bigger and it moves into POST request. But if you look, you can still see the token is available as part of this. So what we showed here was a case of combining ArcGIS identity with API keys for an application. And this allowed us to use the ArcGIS identity for private data. You saw part of this slide before, and at that point, we just went to the developer dashboard and we created a key. But that's a bad best practice. So let's show you a better best practice. What you want to do is go to your dashboard, and as soon as you've created the API key, you go to manage the keys. And in this case, the Tuesday key that I created, we go into edit it. And we scroll down a little bit. You can see that for right now, this key is configured to be used with the following location services. And these are the ones you get by default. With base maps are always there, you can't really turn it off. But for geocoding, routing, and service area, those are functionality that you can turn off. So if you know that you're not going to use this key with those functionalities, you should turn those off. The second part, which may be even more important for locking down your application, is adding a referrer. So this is a pretty standard way of locking down your application using the referrer that's being sent in the request for the application. Now, what's important to do that, you of course need to know what your referrer is. Now, in the basic case, you know the URLs you're going to have, and you can use that. But sometimes it's not as straightforward as you maybe think. So let's look at this solve request. And if we look at the request headers that are being sent from the browser, we can see that the referrer here is cdpn.io. Now, the URL of the application is actually CodePen. So in the case of CodePen, the one you need to put in is actually the actual referrer being sent in, not the URL in the website. So if I here added HTTPS CodePen, or maybe a little fancy, star.codepen.com. Now, my application should not work because that's not the referrer that's being sent in. Now, most of the times, this basically just starts working right away. Sometimes it takes a few minutes. So let's see if it kicks in if I speak real slowly. So what should happen now is that when I create this route task request, it should fail. All right, didn't kick in yet. but it will. So the point of this being is that the proper one you want to use for CodePen is this. Now, another aspect of having API keys is to keep an eye on their consumption. So if we scroll up and we look, we have a usage tab. And the key that I just created hasn't seen much usage, so I just created it. But a little bit. But let's go back a little bit and look at a key I created a few days ago that has a little bit more of a usage. So here you can see I've used, you can get a little chart. You can pick what cycle you want to do it for the last 7 days. And you can see which days I worked on it. You see the tables about which ones you've used, the number of tiles, the routes, and you could request and optimize routes. Now, if you see the traffic going up on this and you don't think it's yours, it's time to maybe change your key or restrict it even more. Another thing I wanted to point out off the dashboard is that if you logged in as a developer with a developer account, as opposed to an account that belongs to an ArcGIS organization, you have 2 extra tabs, usage and account. This usage basically refers to your billing. And in this case, you can see that if I look over the last 7 days, I have been using $3 and most of that on optimized routes. Now, if you have a lot of requests, you'll see their chart here showing up. This is basically the free usage you have. So base map tiles, 2 million, and mine is so small that it doesn't even show up on the chart. And the same thing for my number of route requests and geocode. And with that, I end the main part of our sessions. And we're now going to start.
Bjorn, before we do that, I'm going to come back to my demo real quick if you don't mind.
Yes. Let's see if if it really works now.
All right. I'm going to stop.
I will stop sharing my screen.
And let's see. All right. So we should be back to the CodePen that wasn't working before, and I figured what it was, and it's a kind of a good part of this anyway. All right. So still not working here. Now I'm going to go to my API key that I set up for this. And it's a data access key. And you're going to go into the configuration part that Bjorn was just showing and select the content that you want to have access through the key. And if you see here that I've already added this map, that's what I didn't do before. It only had the previous content and the previous map I've been testing with. And so when I created a new map, it wasn't included. I've now added it, and it's included as part of the allowed resources accessed by the key. All right, so let's go back here and try this out after I've added this. And should do a refresh. And the map we authored in the map viewer is now brought over to the sample, and with that, you kind of have all the content you created through your subscription, and now embedded in your app through the API key that you created and allowed access to the specific items. Now that is it. And I think we can take any Q&A.
Okay. Let's open up to questions. So we have a question for Chris. When using an API key, is it possible to access feature layers in my ArcGIS Online account that are not public? For example, if they are only accessible to myself and my organization, I've been able to access public layers, but not private layers.
Yes, and that was a reason I want to come back to that, is that specifically for your question and clean up there, and that you can configure your API key to allow access to private content, and that workflow that I just showed is how to do that It's rather than API keys having access to the various helper services, subscriber content, that you select each individual item that you want to have access to that particular API key, and then it should work in your app for that key.
Okay, a question for Bjorn. How do you keep the API key out of client-side code? And passwords for that matter, Bjorn. Just kidding. Certain compliance standards will not allow API keys to be present in the client-side based code.
That's a great question. And the answer is you cannot keep an API key out of your client code. So if you don't want to have the code that, so if we go back to the second slide I showed, is that API keys are a permanent or long-term token, and that's why it's a security risk. And so the reason, since you can't keep it out, and if you're not allowed to do it, or if you don't want to do tokens that way, then you have to use OAuth, which is our alternative solution that's been supported for a very long time. Now, API keys have their use cases, and it's an industry standard. Most of our fellow geospatial APIs from other companies and organizations support API keys, and it's a pretty common scenario that people have them. But part of the reason why I wanted to point out how you lock them down with what they can access and restricting them by refer, neither one of those is fully secure. It's easy enough to fake, and keeping an eye on the traffic or the consumption is one way to know, if somebody else is using it, but it's not as secure as using OAuth. That's the short answer.
Can they use a proxy?
You could create a proxy, and there are ways you can do that. So in ArcGIS Online, there are multiple ways to create proxies. So I call them utility services, but Chris has the official name for them.
Yeah, service proxies.
Service proxies. And you can do that as a way of embedding a password and using it as a proxy.
Okay. Can I copy a feature layer from one server to another of mine if I have the appropriate license in case their server were to go down? Chris, you want to take that?
Yeah. Yes, in a way. And it's not easy. There's not a button to click that says copy. But what you can do is you can republish the source data, or there's other like geoprocessing tools available where you can script to basically take data from one to the other. But ultimately, if you have the source data, you can publish it to the other service. Now, there are other strategies, and you mentioned those having the appropriate license and collaborations, whether that's one server to another server and through enterprise, or whether that's enterprise to online. And there's the collaboration where it creates a handshake between the two enterprise environments or the online environment is heavy. But if you want to have that failover that you're talking about or backup, that's a really powerful way to do it, because you can establish this on a cadence where you're updating nightly, maybe you're doing field collection and you're getting data from other things. So as a really robust, reliable backup strategy, that's really good. But you can still do things like just publishing data and copying up the existing tool like geoprocessing, and just publishing source files separately.
Okay, there's a question. Is there a way for the JavaScript API to consume SOAP-based geocode service? For example, custom-made .NET service application.
So I can take that question. The JavaScript API, when it comes to geocode services, connect to services that looks like ArcGIS service endpoints. And so while you could create something custom, out of the box, the API supports two things, either geocode services or feature services. And it has to behave similar to those. And I think that among our samples in the documentation, we have a pretty detailed example about how to do it with a service, a feature service, I think it is.
So be custom code, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Do all hosted layer types, I suppose that means do all ArcGIS Online hosted layer types support API keys?
So I think it's important there, like Julie mentioned, this is for ArcGIS Online. API keys are supported for ArcGIS Online and not with other ArcGIS servers or enterprise. But for the case of ArcGIS Online, all the hosted layer types that are ArcGIS types does support API keys. Now, the ArcGIS Online platform also supports hosted layers that are OGC based and not ArcGIS server type, so WMTS and WFS. And Chris has something to say about that.
Yeah, so just reiterate what Bjorn said is that the OGC layers by spec, they don't support tokens, and so that's something that hasn't been added there. However, the new WFS is it was previously WFS 3, it's now OGC Features API. That will be coming out in the UC release, and that will be expected to support API keys, and that's has more of a RESTful endpoint for working with OGC layers, which kind of unlocks a lot of this.
Right.
Yes, our JavaScript API already supports that format as well. There's a question, do you have statistics on how many tiles a user requests on average when he uses ArcGIS API for JavaScript web application with an Esri base map?
Not that I know of. It obviously depends on a lot of different things. Anything from, what screen size are they? A small screen versus a big screen is going to request more tiles. How much do we use the application? The longer you stay or the more you zoom in and out and pan. We have some applications where you might be looking at some statistics and you're just changing the rendering on the maps. You're not actually changing the base map. You're not panning. In that case, it's not many requests. But if you have more of an app where people are zooming around or panning, obviously that would be more requests.
Yeah, there's great variability with that question. Okay, so I think that is all the questions I have on my list. We'll go ahead and end early. I wanted to also mention, if you guys think of any other questions, we have a session dedicated to all of your questions, anything that doesn't get answered throughout your sessions, or if you go to ask the expert. You can also go there to ask questions, but at the end of the week, if you still have more, you can attend our Ask Us Anything session, and we will focus the entire hour on answering the rest of your questions.
I also want to point out two other resources. So the Ask Our Experts is a great place to ask questions. And if in this session, we focused a lot about the JavaScript API part of the ArcGIS platform, but there is a channel in the Ask Our Experts called ArcGIS Platform, where if you have more questions about the business model and those type of questions, ask them there. They've also had a session earlier and they posted all the questions and answers and questions, no, Q&A, questions and answers into that channel. So there's a lot of resources there. If you have questions about the JS API aspects of it, we have a channel called Web Development where you can ask your JS API questions.
I have a question for you, Bjorn. Did you change your password yet?
No, but I will do it in the next few minutes.
Oh, we had a, let's see. Oh, okay. There's a question about getting our contact information. If someone would like to talk to Chris or Bjorn, go to the Ask Our Experts virtual island, and you can connect with them directly.
In general, if you have technical questions about JavaScript API, you don't have to ask just me and Chris. There are a lot of other people, so the best place is probably to start at Ask Our Experts, and there are other experts there who can help with those type of questions.
All right, thanks everybody for joining, and hope you have a great week.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, bye.